What's going on, Argos fans? Sean Bowen and Mike Hogan here for Keys of the Game, getting you set for a Week 5 matchup against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers as the Toronto Argonauts hit the road for 3 straight starting this Friday in Winnipeg. Hoagie, we go back to last Saturday, a moral victory of sorts. A lot of stuff to build off of. One of them being James Wilder Jr. factored very nicely into the passing game with 73 yards and a late touchdown to get this team back into the game and send these Argo fans into a frenzy. I want to get your take on how much he has introduced himself into the receiving game and how has he become that proven kind of check down safety for McLeod Bethel Thompson.
Well, because of his size and his speed, he's a nightmare for linebackers if they can get him in space one-on-one. We saw it especially as the game progressed. He was able to get a couple of passes out in the flat and just take it and get going, downhill, which is when he's most effective. Get that momentum behind him, use his size and get up against smaller DBs. And when he's doing that, he's a really dangerous weapon. So whether it's between the tackles or getting the ball in space, I don't care if he runs the ball 20 times. I'd love to see him get 20 touches though.
Yeah. Another positive to build on last week was the defensive line and the defensive unit as a whole. Registering their first 2 sacks of the season. Cleon Lang early in the first half getting one on Mike Riley. And I was down on the sidelines and I looked over to the BC bench and you could see the frustration on Mike Riley's face because he does not like getting pressure. This week we're going into a different situation. We don't know who's starting for Winnipeg as of yet. It's either going to be Matt Nichols or Chris Strevler. It's a defensive game that's going to need to be taken some planning for when you're going up against 2 different style quarterbacks. How does this defensive unit build on that game from last Saturday into going into this Friday?
Well, we talked about it a week ago where when you get pass rush, your secondary all of a sudden looks better because it doesn't have to cover as much. When the secondary is covering better, it makes your pass rush look better because it's got more time to get to the quarterback when the quarterback has to continually check down. Last week, secondary played better, D-line played better. D-line played better, secondary played better. Coincidence? Not at all. And don't forget, there were a ton of new starters and new players under Corey Chamberlain's defense. And it was a new defensive coordinator for a lot of guys. We knew this was going to take time.
We spoke with Cleon Lang today after practice, and I asked him, what does that first sack do for you? And he says the confidence is great. I mean, it obviously helps building this defensive unit moving forward. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. I mean, last week, the ending to the game was not what this team envisioned. I mean, Chris Rainey is a proven return man in this league. I mean, you talk about the best return men, I mean, him, Brandon Banks, I mean, the list kind of goes on, but those 2 are tops of the list. He wasn't hanging his head after last game. I mean, he knows what he did, and his teammates were there to pick him up, and we talked to James Wilder Jr. afterwards, and he said, you let it sink for 2 hours, and that's it, you forget about it. How is he going to factor in to Friday's game, against Winnipeg, going up against a pretty good, special teams defense in Winnipeg?
Chris Rainey is awesome. He's a great returner, had a brain cramp, and it came at the worst possible time. He was devastated after that game. He did hang his head, and he took it on himself. He said afterwards as well, that one's on me. He told his teammates, that one's on me. And this is a guy that had a 79-yard touchdown return earlier. He's the kind of guy that can break one. Mike O'Shea is a guru in special teams. We all know that. We saw that here in Toronto. But go back a couple of years ago, Martese Jackson had his national coming out party in terms of, hey, who's this guy in Winnipeg with a couple of returns for touchdowns. So, it can be there. It's there for the taking, and they've got one of the best in the league in Chris Rainey.
From one aspect of running on special teams, now we go back to the offensive side of the ball, and Andrew Harris is one of the best running backs in the Canadian Football League. I mean, he had a fantastic game last week against Ottawa. This defensive line is going to have their handful containing him. How do they do that on Friday?
You get everybody involved. It's nice to keep him between the tackles if you can, so if you can get some penetration from the ends. That said, it's going to be the linebackers. Ian Wild is going to be a guy who's going to see him a lot, so is Micah Alway. And it's up to the defenders to come up when they read run and make the correct read, that they come up in support. And there are going to be opportunities for DBs in space to make tackles. That's one thing, one area where the Argos haven't been very good so far this year is the tackles in open spaces. It's gotten better. It's gotten progressively better. It was terrible, certainly, in the game against Hamilton. So, Ian Wild is a guy who's going back to Winnipeg as well, so I think he wants to have a good game. So he can make a statement going one-on-one against arguably the best back in the league.
They call him captain inside the room for a reason. I mean, a 6-year veteran, spent his first 6 years in Winnipeg. He makes his return back to the Blue Bombers this Friday as the Argos take on.
And a 2-sport guy, by the way.
Oh, really?
A 2-sport guy. He was a great lacrosse player at Mercyhurst, where he played in university. They got to the national championship game. They won. He scored 4 goals in the NCAA championship game, including the winner. So he's a two-sport guy. Got to give him his props, right?
Well, hopefully he can kind of translate that on Friday as the Argos look for their first win of the season as they go up against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. That'll be on TSN. On behalf of Mike Hogan, I'm Sean Bowen. Thanks very much for joining us, and be sure to keep it locked on all the Argos social media channels for up-to-date information and news regarding the team.